All right. Episode 13. So last time we left off, I think, building the very, very beginning of the Ember client. I honestly don't remember exactly what we were doing when we stopped. So we're going to pick up there. I'll open up the server and the client, and we'll build a bit more of the Ember client. Again, we're not going to style anything for now. We're going to keep that real simple, but we're going to sort of blast through the basic sort of MVP features, which is just CRUD, type behavior on a few things. So creating organizations, which we haven't done yet, memberships in the organization, creating an auction, and then adding donations to the auction. Haven't done the design yet. Haven't even really totally worked out the routes yet, but it's pretty easy to kind of change these as we go with Ember, so we can experiment, see what we like, and have a bit of fun with it. And yeah, we'll see. So it's 8:30 right now for me. Usually I start a little bit past 10, but I don't think that I'll go past 10 tonight. So see how this goes. All right. So sort of to take a look in the GitHub projects at what we left with. So on the server side, we haven't built the authorization policies. I'm going to skip over that for now. We're going to dedicate an episode or two of that, or two to that topic, but not yet. Documentation about OAuth tokens, we just have to do that at some point. So I think we're good on the server side. So I'm going to boot up the server in our development environment. Okay. So we'll run that locally here. And then let's take a look at the client. Okay, so we didn't really, shame on me. We did not leave off with any issues documented for the client. Maybe we'll first do that. We'll just sort of build out a few issues that we're going to handle today. So I will go into the client. All right. All right, so once that boots up, we'll take a look. Now, where we left off is we just have the basics around authorization in place on the Ember side. So let's take a look, right? So we handled the register user, and to do the whole flow of this, I'll just I'm going to go and reset things on the server just so we sort of start fresh. And then we'll log in just to kind of remind ourselves where we are. I think I'm going to add one small feature to the way the login works, or registration works, to make it a little bit better. And then we'll get on to sort of building out the basic CRUD for the core resources. Okay, so register user. All right, so now when we hit save user, what it does is takes us to the login page, and then I actually have to log in with that those credentials, and then you'll see I'm logged in. It knows who I am, and I can log back out. So that's not really the behavior we want. We want that when you register, that it automatically logs us in. So let's make that change to how the application works, right? So that when I hit save user and register, that it logs me in and takes me to the home page of the application. And then once we have that, we'll work on the rest of the resources. But that seems like a better way to do this. Okay. So right now, let's take a look at how registration works and then how login works, those two. So on the registration, there's the register user, we're gonna look at the controller. So there's this save user, right? And on user, we're transitioning to the route login. But what we want to do instead on this is once it's saved, we want to send an action login up into the application, higher in the route tree. And we want to use the same behavior we're using on the login controller, which is here. So I think that what we want to do then is hoist this behavior out of the login controller. So we want to move login up to the application route so that we can both call it from the login controller if we're logging in directly from the login page, or we can send the action from the register user controller and use the same capabilities. So why don't we start this by, and again, it'd be like, ideally I would TDD this part. We're going to come back to testing at the end with Ember, in large part because my TDD skills aren't quite as good. And in general, right now, I use integration tests with Ember to sort of test that the whole flow of the app works, and I do that later. I think that it's not necessarily how I'd like to do it. I think I likely will go down the path of building Ember apps more similarly to how I build Rails apps, at least for part of it. But for now, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to first move this up into the application route. So I'm going to add in the actions a login. But here, we're not going to have the properties identification and passwords. We're going to have those as arguments. Okay, and then get rid of this. And then the rest should work okay. Now you see we've got this set error message, reason error. So this was because we were on the login controller, we were setting the error message so that we could see what the error was on the login. So we're going to have to do something in order to set this, maybe pass the controller in. But for now, I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to just sort of no-op this bit. I'll comment it out. So back on the login, then I'm going to send this. So in login, I will, well, we actually can totally get rid of this and just from the template, right, the login template here, the action login, I can just pass the identification and then the password. And that should be fine. And this if error message, we don't have that now, but I'll just keep that there. Okay. So let's, we're going to go through this workflow and see once we've got this in place, if we can log in fine, and then we'll refactor this to actually log in after we create the user automatically. All right, so that works. So that refactor works. Again, all we did was move that action from the login controller up to the application route. And the way that actions work is they're gonna go from the component to the controller. In this case, just the controller up to the route, and then up the route hierarchy. So now we can also, in register user, instead of transitioning to the route login, we can send action. Or send rather. So we'll send login and then user dot email and user dot password. All right, so we're going to send this action. And email is identification. Password is the password, obviously. So now we should be able to do that just fine. right, so the idea here is when I save now, it's going to log me in and send me to the main page. So let's see what went wrong. Well, so I'm not quite sure what went wrong here. I'm gonna pay closer attention this time. Let's see. Okay. So when we saved, let's see, on this side, it was created. And when I look at my Ember, oh, about to log in. Okay, so now, I'm not sure what was going on in the console before, but now we can see it. So I can see that the user did save correctly. It says about to log in, which is what I was logging here, but this didn't behave as we expected. So let's see what ridiculous Ember error I am making. So this is from the component. I'm sorry, from a controller, right? So let's see here. Controller send. Send action name. Yeah, so I mean that certainly seems like it would be what we want to do. So let's log these two. Oh, of course. So it's that, as always, I got the name of email address wrong. Yeah, which is ridiculous, since I think it's silly when people just use email instead of email address, but that's what the problem was going to be. Not sure why my dog's going crazy. All right, so let's just verify that this works, and then we will move on. So there we saw about to log in again, but the login did not happen. So let's log the email address and the password. See what the issue is. Oh, you just saw that it created two instances of user when I clicked away and then back to register user. We're going to want to fix that at some point. So here we go. Oh, interesting. So maybe I have to call get. I actually, that's sort of dumb of me that I made this mistake. For whatever reason, I thought I could just use the dot notation on this, but it's probably my using Ruby much more than JavaScript that's biting me in the butt. So we'll see if that's what it was. certainly doesn't seem like that's what it would be. I'm going to log these too. All right, now we're logged in. So that's what the issue was, and that's a dumb mistake by me. So now we don't have that dumb sort of register then login flow. It just logs us in automatically. We move to the login up to the application route, which makes more sense, and we're reusing it between the two. So good. That's all simple, straightforward, makes sense. So why don't we just because we saw that issue. So I see two things here. So one is now we've got these two users in our store. One is user with ID 1 and the user with ID me. And remember, this is because of the way that we are doing it in the session user service. So if you go to session user, I say get find record me. But what that does is it creates a record in the store for me, but then it returns the ID 1, which is why we have both. So we should clean that up. And we also should clean up the issue of when we go back to the register user route again and again, it's creating a new user every time and not getting rid of the old one. That looks a little messy. So let's just clean those things up to sort of avoid just building up tons of cruft as we go along, and then we'll move on to the basic resources. Okay, so let's take a look at why that happens. So if I go to my register user route, you'll see that every time I come in, then this is happening, right? It's creating a record for the user. So let's take a look at the documentation and see how we probably should handle this. So I think that the best way to look at things when you're going to look something up in Ember and you're not familiar with it is go to the guides. In general, they're quite good and kept up to date with the new releases. Things with Ember change relatively frequently. And I think that now that the guides are always up to date, it's helpful just to sort of look here. It's surprising what percentage of the time the answer is basically in the vanilla guides, or at least you can start there and then get pointed in the right direction. So I think what we need is when we leave this route, right, when we leave the register user route, we could do this multiple ways, right? So you could say if we leave the route, we want to get rid of that user. And let's take a look at the behavior. So if I like type in Sean here, go back to the homepage, go back to this, it's no longer there. So that's a little, that's a little weird. Like maybe we would want it to keep that. So maybe that's a little strange that that's doing that, or maybe we would want when we go away and then come back to register user, maybe we would want it to be brand new. Maybe it would be weird if it was still filled in. So let's take a look at both ways. So in the one case where we'd want it to go away, what we would want is there must be a hook on the route that says, hey, when you leave the route, then let's clean up the user that we created. So let's look at what the options are for us here. Okay, so let's take a look in here. So this is just the basics of routing. This is just the router itself. Specifying the route's model. So this is sort of what we're doing here. this isn't really what we want. I mean, I want to look for the hook that says, hey, when I leave this, get rid of the model. But this isn't obvious. So, we've got model before model, after model. Now here, will transition. So this is interesting. I mean, I think it's not as obvious in the guide exactly what the various hooks are as maybe we'd like it to be. So let's then go take a look at the documentation actually for this. All right, so let's search for will transition, because that's going to be okay. So will transition is handle notifying any listeners of any impending URL change. Router level will transition. So let's look at the router. Let's take a look at the methods, right? Because one of these is what we're going to want to use. I think route, rather, is what we want to look at. There we go. So for example, we've got, the ones that we know of, like model, right? This is the hook to implement the, converting the URL into the model. Let's handle this one first. So I think that I want to figure out, right? So we can only be registering one user at a time in the application. So, and I'm not 100% sure how to do this, but that means that when I go to, let's go back here. So when I go to register user and then go away and then go back, ideally I'd like it to then look up the, that first, the model, the user model with the ID that's null when I come back, so I can keep filling it out. So let's figure out how to do that. Actually, not positive. As simple. I mean, I know of various ways we could do it, but I'm not positive what the idiomatic way is. So let's sort of take a look through and see what it says. Well, let's see if we can actually find a user with ID null. Yeah, let's start there. That seems like the most obvious way to do it. So let's take a look at finding record. So find record's going to go out to the network if we don't have one already. Peak record is going to go by type and ID, but not make a network request, and this will only return a record if it's already present in the store, and this looks to be synchronous, I think. I've never actually used this method. I think this was in the newer version of Ember, but let's try it. So we'll say, like, new user equals this get store dot peak record user null. I'm not positive if this is, if that's going to do what we think, but we'll see. We'll say if new user, turn new user, else. Okay. Well, you can see that is not what I thought may happen. So well, let's see. So let's try it with peak all, just to see what that does. And let's see, I think that there's a find method in Ember, right? Yeah. Well, there we go. So now if I go away and then come back, it's going to give me the same one. So I guess it looks like then you can't just peek for the null one, but then this, I took a look at all of the users and found the one that had the ID was null. And I'm sure, you know, I don't write tons of Ember, so my code is not going to be super idiomatic, I bet, but you know, that's fine. You know, this is this will work fine. So again, when I come into the register user route, I first take a look into the users. I find the one with the ID of null. If that is there, I return that. Otherwise, I create a new record. So let's take a look at how this would work, right? So okay, and there we go. Now we can see if I look into my look into the user now, there isn't a user with null anymore. So if I click register user, now it'll create a new one. Now we see actually the one with me here, which I think we wanted to deal with next. And let's just check to see what happens if we do this. So in this case, it did persist, but when we attempted to authenticate, I think it's throwing an error that we're not catching because we already are logged in. And I think that that's actually fine. I think that's the behavior you'd expect. Now, you wouldn't expect the behavior of that we just saw where it would sort of sit on the form. So maybe what we'll do is go back into our register user route, and we'll look to see if this is authenticated, if the session is authenticated before we decide what to do. And then I'll move on past this. But I mean, part of my point here is to show you that it's not that intimidating to try to figure things out in Ember, even if you don't know how to do it, and even if you're, you know, relatively new to some of these ideas. So I'm going to have the session. I'm going to inject that in. Okay, and then here we will say if self get session is authenticated, which we've used before. So if it's authenticated, then I want to transition to route application. Otherwise, we will log in. Yeah. All right, so let's just sort of check that workflow, and then we'll move on to doing something new. Okay, so here we go. So this will log her in, which it did. Now if we register a new user, which should work fine. There we go. Now that brought us back to the main page. It's, you know, maybe perhaps we would show a flash, perhaps we'd go to that user page, who knows? But, you know, you can kind of get the idea of how you'd stitch some things together. Now, let's let's now clean this up. So we've cleaned up the rest. Now, I don't like that this sort of me is floating around. And every time I see something like this, it's an opportunity to understand how things are working a bit better, right? So it's pretty clear why this would be there, because again, back in our session user service, we say return find the record user me. Now, this is only going to get computed when the access token changes, right? So and we're using this me as just a hack to get who the user is from the authentication token. So I think all we're going to do here is we will let me equals this. I'm going to say, let my ID, or I'll say me ID. I think me undies, that ad I keep hearing, equals me get ID. And then I think that we can, is it delete record? I'm not sure what the method is, but delete record. So delete record is going to remove that from the store. So now we can say, okay, find the record. We know that this is in, actually, so we're going to peek record user and then me get ID. I think that's fine. Peed record is definitely not what I meant to type. So now the session user is going to be that. And then once we have that user, we can get rid of, I don't think we need this, we can delete the record that is me. Right, so I can say like this.get store delete record, and then I think, what was the syntax? You actually pass in the record. Okay. So I don't think we needed this bit then. Yeah. See what bug I just wrote. I did not expect that. So what is this? Cannot read property delete record. What am I missing? So this seems like whatever the problem is should be extremely obvious. What am I missing? Okay. So not clear to me why this is not working. Let's just, sometimes I do that. I'll just get rid of that and let's try it again. Well, turns out I did not type it incorrectly that first time. Yeah, I mean, that shouldn't do anything different. Cannot read property, delete record of null. Oh, I see. So we're gonna try this again. So I've mentioned before that promises will often get you, and I think that is exactly what's going on here. So when we call find, right, that's going to return a promise, and we have to wait till that promise resolves before we can get rid of that record in the store. So let's try this again. So we're going to say get store and then find record user me. So this is a promise. We'll say then user. Okay. So now we've got it this way. Let's write it this way and see what happens. Which is still showing that error. So sometimes when I have trouble with promises, I'll make this change. And I think this can be a little unpopular, so maybe this isn't the right idiomatic way to do it. So what I'm going to say is, okay, I'm going to observe. So let's just make sure that's the right syntax. So instead, I think we put it on the end. Now, I'm sure that there's a syntax we can use on the front end, but for now, okay. So now this will observe that. And what we're going to do is we will set the user equal to the user. Did I miss? Oh, right. I didn't get rid of this. I'm sure that there's a typo that I'm not seeing. So I'm going to, again, rewrite this. All right. Cool. So now that's working. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to observe the access token. We're going to have that go on init so that if it's there in the first place, then it still is going to set the user, and this is going to happen inside, when the promise resolves and sets the user, and then we're using user here. So I can remove at this. So if we go back to our store, we still have this me guy. And the whole point is I didn't want that there, and I want to learn how we get rid of it. And hopefully you've learned something about promises, and I've relearned it again. So here we go. We'll say, now this we had to do, let's see. So now we're back to the cannot read property delete record of null. So it's interesting when we did that. So we see function record just calls record.delete record. Okay. So I suspect even if we use this, it's not going to remove it from the store. But let's find out. Now that we're knee deep in this, we have to learn what the issue is. So okay. God, is that stupid? So it was the fact that they're named the same that confused me. So what it's saying is that this is null, that this is null, and then when it's trying to call delete record on it, which is how this is implemented, it's getting it. And since that same method name, delete record, is on the store also, that's why I didn't understand why the heck it thought that the store was null. Okay, well, there we go. Boy, that is a dumb mistake. So let's take a look at the store and see how we can get rid of this record. And one thing we can do is we can just sort of go through the records and find the one that has the ID equal to me. So why don't we try that? Cannot read property get of undefined. Now, what in the world is it saying that about? Oh, there we go. So now we've been dealing with this stupid error for long enough. I'm starting to see things. Okay, so now I still got this me, because I have not done anything with it here. Back to cannot delete record of undefined. So let's take a look at what these IDs are. Me and 1. Of course, I didn't return. Again, this is the night of programming JavaScript like it's Ruby, apparently. Okay, so attempted to handle event delete record on this user while it's in the state loading. So given that this is sort of a funky record, perhaps we have to use a different method to get rid of it. And it's not actually important to get rid of it, but this is now a matter of just finding out how Ember works. So we're going to store. Let's take a look at what other methods we have. Now, what does unload record do? I wonder. Well, let's find out. Well, there we go. Unload record is what we wanted. So now, that's what I expect, right? I can come back and it's going to still have the same registration, which is good. Let's sort of do the whole workflow again. And then this is, once I was starting to get to a place like now, if I may think about an integration test. Now we're going to probably still change this workflow a bit, so I'm not going to do that yet, but this is when I'd consider it at least. Okay. Okay, that logs me in. Now I see this me here, even though I thought we had removed it, which is interesting, given that that was the whole point. Now, okay, so when I refresh now, I don't see that anymore. So we'll take a look at our implementation and see why that may be. In fact, I'll go back in, I'll log in, which we haven't done in a while. Okay, see the me again. Here, only that. So let's take a look. Now this is a little suspicious for what it's worth, and maybe here we're caring about you know, looking for something that doesn't even matter, because the number of users that it shows is 2, which I suspect is the null and the logged in, because it says 1 there, and if I log in, see what it goes to. Now it goes to 2, even though it shows me there. So you know what? I'm going to say we're just going to remove this. I think that was, you know, I think we learned some things about promises. We saw something about unload record. You know, maybe it just doesn't matter. We've got that guy here. It seems to be a little bit of a weird type of record, given that when we try to find record with it, or peak record, we don't see it, etc. So I'm just going to go back to where we started. There we go. That's working again. Okay, so that was not the most elegant programming I've ever done, but all right. So I'll say login after registration, and then keep same, or so keep registration user until save. Okay. So now let's go back to our app and sort of think about what we want to do next. Now, okay, so the first thing that we are going to want to do is create a organization. And let's make some GitHub issues for these things. So create organization route, and then, you know, say create organization route with organization. Okay. So we're going to want that, right? We'll have a link here once you're logged in that you can create a new organization. That seems like a good idea. Probably going to want to add you as a member when we create that organization. So add user as member, creating organization. Now that sort of seems like something the server should do, shouldn't it, by default? Because we're going to want to have at least one member for every organization. So I'm going to go back over to the server and add that there, because I think that's a better place for it. Okay, we're going to say add user as member of organization on create. Okay, that's a feature that we're ready for now. And perhaps we'll actually implement that right now, right? Because we're going to need it for for this. So basically I'm going to want to have a link here, which is like create an organization, then have a form that just has the name of the organization. And then when I submit it, then I want to be inside of that organization, or then we can create an auction. I think that's sort of the workflow we're going to want to have, and we'll figure out how it looks nice a little later. But I think in terms of the nesting of the URL, because I always think about the URLs, I think it's pretty straightforward how we're going to want to design that. So let's switch back over to the server side and implement that feature we just talked about. Okay. So let's go to our, let's see where we want to test this out. So we're going to want to handle this in the controller. Acceptance user spec. Okay, so we want to say that when we post to the users, that the current user, when we do so, is the one that gets a membership added. Okay, so there are a couple things we've got to do here. One is we have to actually log in with a user, because remember we didn't force that inside of our specs. So we're going to do that, and then once we're there, we'll be able to test that out. Okay. Oh, and what am I doing? This isn't where we want to do this. It's in the organizations, not the users. Jeez. Tired already, I guess, tonight. All right, so when we post in organizations, and we want the current user to get added as a member of that. Okay, so we're going to want to say current user do okay. And then we're going to want to have a header, right, which is, remind ourselves here, authorization bearer. Okay, so header, authorization bearer, and then space, and then the access token. And let's remind ourselves. All right. Okay. So now this should have the current user be this user. So is the header method inside the example request? I don't think so, because I think the request happens right there. This obviously is not what I want to do actually, but I just want to see what the scope is of these calls. Oh, right, because it hasn't been created yet. Now what the heck? Okay. What is the problem here? Probably, let's just read it. So current user is not available on an example group. It's only available from within individual examples. The run in the scope of an example before that. Turns out, if you just read what it says, you can debug anything. God. Okay. So let's figure this out. So validation, record failed, mobile phone numbers already been taken, email addresses already been taken. I don't think this is going to fix it, but that's it. Good. Okay, so God, I programmed about 10 hours today during the day, and it is showing. So, all right, so I've set the current user. I've added the authorization. So now what we want to say is after we have made this request, we think that the organization should have added on to, there should be a membership that has the current user in it. So that's what we're going to test for. Let's see, so memberships, define mm.user equals current user to be nil. Well, I did not expect that. Huh. Yeah. Yeah, can you just wait a second? Yeah. All right, so I'm being summoned. So let's figure this one out, and then I'm calling it quits for a bit because I've been slow tonight. All right, so I'm not sure what the deal is with that. With that error we just saw at all. What in the world is with this error? Well, I guess we haven't actually created the access token yet here, which is another absurd mistake, but let's do that. Okay. See if I can limp into figuring this out. Okay, so now back to what we were doing. All right. All right, so now we want to check if the organization's memberships equals the current user. Okay, and we see that it's not. So finally we have a failing spec that took 7 lines of code and many minutes. And it shouldn't have taken many, but oh well. So how do we want to implement this? So let's take a look at JSON API resources. We're going to use some new features from this. So callbacks. Let's take a look at the callbacks. I don't think that's the kind of callback we're interested in. Resources callbacks. Here we go. So we're going to want after create, right? And then after create on the organization resource, we're going to want to add the current user, the membership for the current user to it. Okay, so we're going to open up organization resource. And we will define after create. This is going to be create membership for current user. Okay. So finally, we're going to want to add this. So we need to pass in to the resource. It's going to need to know who the current user is. We're going to do that through the context. Which, remember, a few episodes ago, I sort of jumped the gun and added this before I needed to, but I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to add that now. Okay, so I will say model.memberships.create user context current user. And there we go. That's all we had to do. Yeah, so there we go. So afterwards, we've added that in. See if that jacked up anything else we had in our application, which it does not. Okay. I think this is a reasonable place to, a pretty good place to have the test. I think that that's, sort of what we're expecting from it's pretty in line with what we're doing with the client. So I think it makes sense to do it this way. So let's commit this stuff. So this is going to be, let's see, add membership to current user creating organization. Okay, done that. And when we resume, what we're going to do is now go back and add on the client side the ability to create the organization, and then from there we will both list its members and then create the ability to create an auction. But let me, all right, so you can see the effects of programming a bit too much and maybe being a bit tired. Is a little slower today, but what the heck, that's how it goes. Go help with the babies, and then I think I'll resume and do the rest of the client CRUD stuff when I get back. So see you then.